All right. Gotz von Berlichingen. This is his autobiography. Not an easy book to find, but I managed to find it somewhere. I forget where I purchased this. It's not one you can come up with quickly and easily. You got to do some searching to find it. Interesting read. He does like any other standard autobiography of the time. He embellishes. Not as bad as some, but he does embellish. If you've ever seen the autobiography of the artist Benvenuto Cellini, yeah, talk about a work of fiction. But this one, yeah, this is his autobiography that he transcribed to his priest. Hello. What's up? Some handouts.
The chairs.
Yes.
I split it.
You need two or one good? All right. So, that's fine. This is our gentleman. This is Gotz. Full name Gottfried von Berlichingen. He went by the name Gotz. I like Gotz, it's much easier. Especially trying to pronounce his last name and not stumble over it every single time. Gotz was born somewhere around 1480. They do not have an exact date for when he was actually born. Died July 23rd of 1562. So he lived a nice long life, 80 some years roughly. For a person who made his life fighting, he had an extremely long life. He was born somewhere around 1480 to Kilian von Berlichingen and Margaretha von Thungen at the family castle in Jagdslausen, a town about 20 miles north of Heilbronn. And it's now southwestern Germany. Both of his parents came from a long line of nobility and the Franconian nobility. Franconia is the region it's mainly northwestern Bavaria is where primarily Franconia resides.
Nuremberg.
Yeah, that region, exactly. He liked Nuremberg. And he was their fifth son born to the family. Again, first son usually became the person who inherited everything. Fifth sons, they did not get much. Here, hand that on back. Oh, don't worry about it, no worries. More people, the better. Another thing, I love questions. So if you have any, please ask, because I tend to forget things and questions are good. He decided as a child, he really didn't care about education. He didn't care about a lot of things. He wanted to ride a horse and fight. That was what he wanted to do with his life. He decided this when he was around 8, 10 years old. That is how he wanted to make a living. He was sent off because fifth born son, he was sent off with relatives to get an education. After a year, he decided no, he did not want this anymore. So all he ever learned was rudimentary writing, rudimentary reading. He never really had any kind of formal education. He was sent off after his cousins who he took in to try to educate him. They decided they couldn't do anything with him, so they sent him off to his cousin Conrad. Conrad was upper level in the nobility a bit. He traveled in the higher circles. He was a good man for Gotz to meet because he got introduced to a lot of important people through him. The biggest thing he did was he took Gotz along to the 1495 Diet of Worms. The Holy Roman Emperor present, where they did all kinds of legal. He got to network. He got to meet the Holy Roman Emperor. He got to network with all this nobility from around the known world. It was an important time for him, just the channeling and the people that he met. During the Diet of Worms, there was something that was passed in the legislation, the Ewiger Landfrieden, or as it's also known, the Perpetual Public Peace. There was a thing allowed in Europe at this time, feuds. Feuds were a legal thing. They had rules. They had how you had to conduct them. They had how they had to be done. Well, this edict outlawed feuds. Germany, after the emperor left, kind of went, yeah, we're just going to ignore that part of the legislation that was passed. We like our feuds. He went off then with Conrad. After Conrad died, he still was like, I just want to fight. So he enlisted in with the Margrave of Brandenburg-Ansbach's regiment of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian's army. And he went off to fight in the Burgundian campaigns, which was between the Holy Roman Empire and France, because over control of the Duchy of Burgundy. Because at that time, the Holy Roman Emperor was of the Habsburg family. The Habsburg family was also the ruling family of Burgundy at that time, but France also wanted the territory. So they had wars over Burgundy went on for quite a long time, back and forth. But he went off and he fought on the side of Maximilian in the first round of the Burgundian Wars. He also then, that was in 1498. In 1499, he traveled with the same group under Maximilian to fight the Swiss. That war did not go very well. The Holy Roman Emperor's side were defeated soundly by the Swiss. And in that, Gotz writes in his autobiography about how he felt that the command structure of the Holy Roman Emperor's army was extremely bloated and very extremely top-heavy. And all this bureaucracy and everything else led to them not being able to fight efficiently in the battle. And it was something where he learned about how to run a campaign. That he didn't want these huge inflated top end. He wanted a few short people at the top and then a whole bunch of people underneath to do the dirty work. Exactly. Too many cooks. Yes, that is a very good analogy. So then we get back to the feuds. Legality of feuds. As you said, the Holy Roman Emperor outlawed them. Germany said, we don't care. We're going to keep on doing feuds. A feud could be a territory versus a territory. It could be a territory versus a person. It could be a person on person. It could be any of those. They always had laws about how they were conducted, and they had to start out with something called an absage, which was a formal challenge. This was a declaration that you have violated my rights. I have declared a feud against you. The damage in a feud was only supposed to be limited to property. You were not supposed to harm the people. You could go and you could pillage, you could burn, you could rob, you could do all of that, but you were not supposed to harm the people. Now, did it happen? Yes. The lower class, if they got in the way of a feud, they died, it was understandable. If you harmed a nobleman in a feud, you were in a lot of trouble. You could be put under imperial ban and hunted down like a dog if you harmed a nobleman in a feud. The feuds ended when the other side, the challenge side, finally said, okay, we need to end this. And some kind of agreement would be reached. It could be monetary, it could be territorial, it could be some way to compensate the original challenger for whatever damage he felt that he had been had. And once that was reached, the feud was then at that point done, and everybody could go on with their life again. If you violated those rules of the feud, you were considered a brigand. You were a common criminal if you violated the laws of a feud. And you again could be hunted by any member of the populace or nobility, could hunt you down and collect a reward that would have been issued on your head. Any questions at all? Anything? Oh, good. Okay, let's keep going. His first feud, 1500 to 1502, he joined with the robber knight. If you ever heard the term robber knights, yeah, Gotz is one of them. He was one of the premiers. But he joined with the robber knight Hans Thalacker of Massenbach in his feud against the Duchy of Württemberg. Gotz learned during this time with Thalacker how feuds were conducted and how you could use them to make money. That was how he did it. People who were in my class yesterday, you saw one approach for making lots of money. This guy, he wanted to make lots of money too, but he did it in a totally different manner. You betcha. He learned tactics for doing ambushes out in the convoys. Merchant caravans were prime targets. You could capture the caravan, you take the goods, resell them yourself at a profit, and you also, anybody in that caravan who was of a higher status would be ransomed back for their freedom. So lots of ways for him to make money on that.
So kidnapping was allowed.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
it was a primary way of making money in a feud.
As
Because you
long
kidnap
as
them.
as long as
Yep.
they got back home with no bruises or bumps.
Exactly. Yep. You didn't hurt them. Yep. Yep.
It's just ransom.
Yep. You capture them, you can use them as ransom. He also learned the importance of having friends, high-ranking friends, who would set up places where if he got in trouble, he could hide and be defended. He had a couple people who his entire life backed him and always provided him safe haven when he needed it.
Why?
There's just people that he worked with, people that he did them a service with his military or his mercenary work. They got a cut.
Connections.
Yes, exactly. Yep, he was scratch your back, I'll scratch yours type of deal. So, later, after that, in 1504, 1505, he joined in the Landshut War of Succession. Landshut is a province in Bavaria, and it tried to gain its independence from Bavaria. Under Elizabeth of Bavaria-Landshut and Count Palatine Ruprecht decided to rebel against the rest of Bavaria, and Duke Albrecht IV of Bavaria-Munich in particular. The war involved ended up being almost a German civil war. Almost all of the territories of southern Germany at one point sided with one side or the other in this. And they all had one thing in mind: what can we gain out of this war? Can we get some territory? What can we do? So they all lined up their sides. Gotz, even though he felt more in line with Elizabeth and Ruprecht, he sided with Albrecht, because at the time he was staying at a safe castle of a supporter of Albrecht. He even notes in his autobiography, 2 of his brothers, most of his cousins, and many people that he lived in the same town with were on the other side when he was fighting. During the siege of the city of Landshut itself, when Duke Albrecht's forces were laying siege to the city, a cannonball came in, and there's 2 different accounts quite of what happened. One is that it directly struck his right hand and removed it. The other, and the more commonly accepted one, was it actually hit his sword and drove his sword into his right forearm, leading to the amputation of his right hand. Yeah, right hand, fighter. You didn't have a choice. You were right-handed. He has now lost his sword hand, his horse reins, all of that. He had the option, being treated in the army on the field, because he had so many friends within the city. They opened the gates for him to be transported into the city and treated. Miraculously, he survived. He had a couple bouts of illness, of disease that were going through the city. He survived the loss of his hand. He survived the bouts of the disease and survived the siege. Yeah, he's a lucky guy. Yeah, exactly, cockroach. At this point, he developed with the hand of a local blacksmith his first artificial hand. This had wing nuts on it, and it could be locked into position. All the fingers could be locked into different positions, and with it, he could still hold a sword. He could hold the reins to a horse, so he could continue to fight with his hand. Later on, that hand just did not prove. And also, one of the neat things on this, and I'll pass it around. If you look at the thumb, you can see it actually has fingernail detail on the hand. I'll send that around if you want to look at it. Yeah. Later, though, he went and he had a much more elaborate hand made. This one was spring-loaded. It had a latching mechanism in it. It was to the point where not only could he hold a sword, not only could he hold the reins of his horse, he could write with it. Yeah, he couldn't write well. There are examples of his letters still existing, and the script is not very well, but he could still do it. This hand, yeah, there's a lot of medical research on these 2 hands that have been done. And somebody had recently recreated one using 3D printing, recreated the hand. Yeah, a lot elaborate work on that second one.
Even broken though.
Yeah.
Metal.
Yes, the metal work on both of them is just amazing. Now, how did he view his hands? Was this a miracle of modern science that he was able to have this? No, this was a tool. That's all he viewed it was. This was a tool to allow him to continue to fight. That was his interest. That was what these were made to accomplish.
The fingernails are very important.
Yes, they have fingernail detail on them, which is just amazing. After his recovery, after his recovery from his injuries and getting these new hands, he decided he was tired of fighting for other people. He saw the money that could be made running a mercenary unit. And so he decided to form his own mercenary group. He started off with his own feud against the city of Cologne, Nuremberg, and the Archbishop of Mainz. He started feuds with all of them and just made himself an absolute pain in the butt to these people. He raided their merchant caravans. He kidnapped their people, their high-ranking people. He would do raids on the outlying villages within the territory and burn them. Just generally made himself an absolute pain in the side to these three cities and people. In 1512, 1514, he and another knight by the name of Hans von Selbitz teamed up. Selbitz was famous for the fact that he was a robber knight with one leg. So yes, you had a man with one hand, a man with one leg, leading this band of about 130 mercenaries. They ambushed a Nuremberg merchant caravan and kind of went a little above and beyond what you were supposed to do in a feud. They did they got a little hands-on, a little forceful. It was a little rough on some of the people they captured, and it came back to haunt him. Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I found out about this raid and the fact that he had been doing feuds and that he had even violated the treatment of nobility in the feud laws. Thank you. Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian comes out with the quote, Holy God, what is that? The one has one hand, the other one leg. If they both had two legs and two hands, what would they have done? Yeah. Maximilian privately wrote that he admired the work that these two did. He was impressed by what they were able to accomplish. But as Holy Roman Emperor, he had to act. So they were now placed, the both of them, under imperial ban. What imperial ban means is all of your goods are to be confiscated. All property, all goods are now confiscated and become property of the state. You are now lower than a common criminal. You could be openly killed in the streets without any repercussions. And the person who does it will be rewarded. Yes. It is not a good situation to be on. You are now hunted.
Really hard to date.
Yeah. Yeah, the options are limited. Maximilian, though, Gotz had some friends. And he got the Duke of Württemberg, the Count Palatine, and the Bishop of Würzburg, all sided with Gotz and appealed to the Emperor. So the Emperor relinquished parts of the ban. They allowed him to keep his property. They allowed him to keep his life. But he was to sign a document that said he would no longer, he had to negotiate a settlement with Gotz. He paid a fine back to the city of Nuremberg for what damages he had done, and Maximilian then, at the full payment of the fine, lifted the imperial ban. So it's good to have powerful friends. 1414, 1460, he starts a feud with the city of Mainz. His last major feud. Archbishop of Mainz had control, and Gotz were feuding over the control of a field. Gotz's farmers in his territory he controlled had planted crops in the field. The Archbishop of Mainz sent his livestock into the field and destroyed Gotz's crops. So it started a nasty little feud between the two of them. Gotz and his supporters burned the town of Krautheim. Two smaller villages, Ballenberg and Obendorf, were both burned by Gotz's supporters. Gotz was hoping to force the bailiff of the town of Krautheim, a man by the name of Max Stumpf, into a direct force-on-force confrontation. Stumpf refused, and in fact sat up in the window of his castle where it was being besieged by Gotz's forces and demanded Gotz's surrender. At this point, you get this famous phrase. Where were we here? Where is this nice little phrase? Sollt mich hinden lecken. Or, he can lick my ass. Yes. He is a popular person who is responsible for popularizing basically the phrase, kiss my ass. He did not originate it, but he popularized it. It became known to this day as the Swabian salute. Yeah. Gotz's forces really handed it to Mainz, though. So the Archbishop of Mainz decided he is going to appeal to the Swabian League. The Swabian League was basically the UN of southern Germany. It was a group of all the territories of southern Germany, a mutual defense league. They came out to the support of Mainz with 400 cavalry and 4,000 infantry to go after Gotz and his group of a couple hundred. Gotz learned pretty quickly, there's times to cut your losses. This was one of them. He very quickly negotiated a settlement with the Archbishop of Mainz to end the feud. He still, even though he paid a little bit of money to Mainz to say, okay, don't hurt me, he still had made enough money on his feud with Mainz and other cities that he was able to buy his own castle. He purchased the castle, the castle of Hornburg. He purchased, and that became his home for the rest of his life. After he got done with major feuding, he decided he wanted to go, because he realized after dealing with the Swabian League that, things could be a little touchy doing feuding, so he went back into professional military. Signed up with Duke Ulrich of Württemberg to fight on his side. Ulrich assigned him his northernmost stronghold of Machmühl. That was in 1517. During this time, Ulrich was vehemently opposed to the Holy Roman Emperor and made himself a major thorn in the side of the Holy Roman Emperor, raiding imperial cities, raiding out into surrounding territories, and just generally making himself extremely unwelcome in southern Germany. For that, the Swabian League was again activated. They came after Duke Ulrich. Maximilian placed Ulrich under the imperial ban. The Swabian League took that opportunity then to march on the Duchy of Württemberg, one, driving Ulrich out of the duchy, which was then turned over to the Holy Roman Emperor as his own territory, and secondly, they captured Gotz again. So now Gotz is imprisoned in Heilbronn, Germany, and he was imprisoned there from 1519 to 1522. Gotz argued on his side he was involved in a legal feud. Therefore, there should be no punishment for what he was doing. He was doing nothing wrong, and he legitimately viewed that he was doing nothing wrong. This was all legal, what he did. On his side, he had two very powerful people. He had the Franconian knight Franz von Sickingen, and the big one, he had the backing of George von Frundsberg. If you know anything about the Landsknechts, if you've ever heard the term, the German mercenary, the Landsknechts, George von Frundsberg is the person who created the Landsknechts. He was one of the most important knights in southern Germany. He was also a very close friend of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian. An extremely good person to have on Gotz's side. On the other side, though, he had some other people, namely the city of Nuremberg, who he had famously fought with multiple times, the city of Augsburg, who he had also fought with multiple times, and the Archbishop of Mainz. All these people that he had been annoying to previously. All of them asked that Gotz be transferred to them, handed over to them for immediate execution. So, in the long run, Maximilian, his supporters that Gotz had, especially with Frundsberg, were able to negotiate a settlement. He's just, like I said, cockroach. He gets out of everything. He signed an agreement in 1522. This agreement said that he would never commit any acts of violence against any member of the Swabian League, even if the League would disband. He also paid a fine to preserve his life, essentially. These terms meant that Gotz was no longer to participate in any more feuding of any kind. He was not allowed to pick up a sword against any of the southern German territories. He had lost his method of gaining fame and fortune. Not a happy person with this. Then we get to 1525, an important event in southern Germany. We have the German peasants, some in Austria, some in the Swiss Confederation. They rise up against the nobility. It is not a single organized thing. It is just bands here and there of peasants rising up against the nobility, sometimes forming armies as large as 15,000, 20,000 peasants going out on march against the nobility. The overall conflict of the peasant wars lasted from 1525 to 1527. Parts of the duchy, Gotz was approached, yes.
What was the impetus for the German peasants to uprise? I mean,
One of the big ones was that up until this time, earlier, they had listed basically under, I'm trying to think of the term, but they had a code of laws that basically was, property was communal. The farm and fields were owned by the community. They were not owned by a person. Anybody could use the farm fields. You could hunt in the woods, you could fish in the streams. They were all community property. What was happening in the early 1500s was Germany was switching over to imperial law, which declared the nobility owned the property. The nobility controlled everything. And that's what the peasants were coming against. They did not like the fact that the nobility was exercising this power over them and demanding money from them, demanding crops from them, demanding, animals from them in order to live on land that they've been living on for centuries. So, he was approached by the 5,000 person strong band from Odenwald, feeling that he basically didn't have a choice because you got 5,000 people going, join us, right? You are going to fight for us, right? And he kind of went, okay, I'll lead you, but I'll tell you what, I'll only do it for 30 days. And they accepted that. They then joined with the Tauber Valley Band, bringing their total combined strength to 15,000 peasants marching. They got into a siege with the city of Würzburg, and it did not go well for the peasants, primarily because they had no weapons, they had no artillery. They were fighting with whatever they could find, going up against trained soldiers. Gotz got to the end of his 30 days, and he said, you know what? I'm done here. You guys are on your own. Have fun. 4 days later, the Swabian League caught up to the band and slaughtered them almost to a man. Yeah, again, he got out just in time. Because he probably would have been captured and executed on the spot 4 days later. Well, there was a slight problem with this, though. The Swabian band eventually did catch up to him, and he was arrested. Why was he arrested? He was accused of willingly aiding the peasant rebellion. He argued, I didn't have a choice. I had no choice. They were going to hurt me if I didn't. I did what I had to do. He even went on to say that he used his control of the peasant army to limit the amount of damage they did to the countryside and the people. That was his argument. His supporters included again the Count Palatine Ludwig, Margrave Casimir, and the total of the Franconian knighthood, all as a backing, backed him as a unit. A good group to have again behind you. Against him, guess who? Bishop of Mainz, Bishop of Würzburg, the imperial cities of Augsburg and Nuremberg. His perpetual enemies. Again, these people wanted him executed. The primary case that they came up against him wasn't so much that he led them. He was able to kind of argue his way out of that. They argued he violated his agreement of 1522 to never take up arms against any of the units of the southern, any of the territories. For that, he was convicted. And again, he was placed in the imperial ban and sentenced to life house arrest. He was to never leave his castle territory, or he would be executed if found outside of it. Well, this lasted for quite a few years, about 17 years. He was under this house arrest. We get to 1542. Gotz by now is in his 60s. Holy Roman Emperor is now Charles V, and they have this slight problem. The Ottomans are invading, and they're invading Habsburg territory. Charles V, Habsburg. They are invading up to the walls of the city of Vienna. Maximilian knew he needed veteran, seasoned fighters. He rescinded the imperial ban if Gotz would come and fight for him. Gotz quickly raised an army of his own and marched to Vienna. They got there just in time to watch the Ottomans leave. So he was not able to participate at all in the fighting. Yeah, basically. Yes, he did, and was paid handsomely. He then, in 1544, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, had issues with France. He joined the campaign with his group under Charles V, and they invaded France. He took part in the siege of Saint-Dizier, and was also present at the final signing of the Treaty of Crépy, which ended that war, that round of fighting between the French and the Spanish. By this time now, Gotz is, he's mid-60s. He's losing his eyesight. He retired to his castle. He became great friends. Well, he decided now, since he's no longer really able to fight, he's going to take up a new profession. He's becoming a lawyer. Yes. Yep. He put the same tenacity into his legal fighting that he put into his fighting with the sword. Who did he go after? Archbishop of Mainz, Archbishop of Würzburg. He filed lawsuits against him to recoup his losses that he had suffered. He also filed lawsuits against anybody he could think of that had wronged him during his lifetime, and spent years just voraciously pursuing these lawsuits.
Did he learn how to read and write by this point?
Not really.
Okay.
He was never really educated, yeah.
Okay, so he's still just,
Yeah.
jaw flapping.
Yep, he is getting it. He's learning on the fly how to do all this.
Okay.
And he continued to earn enough money doing this to fund his lifestyle, since he no longer had fighting to fund it. He also started doing real estate. He would buy and sell real estate. He would purchase territories from different lords and then resell them for a profit to other people. So he was getting into that. And then he decided that still wasn't enough. He started his own bank. Yes, he started doing loans, banking in general. He found a way to survive, a way to keep bringing in the money.
This is about the last 2 decades of his life?
Mhm.
Something like that?
Yeah, pretty much.
60s, 80s.
In his family life, he was married. He fathered 5 children with his wife, 2 with his maid. Yeah, he was him. By the late 1550s, Gotz knew that he was coming towards the end of his life. He was by now completely blind. He made a friend in this local priest, a man by the name of George Gottfried. George Gottfried became his personal attendant, took care of him on a day-to-day basis, took all of his day-to-day situations. It was also at this time that he dictated to Gottfried, hey, now, this work. And it was all done at the very end of his life that he dictated his autobiography to Gottfried. Yes, is it accurate? It's got some interesting bits. There's definitely some embellishment. But for the most part, it provides some really interesting insight into how life was in that time period with fighting and feuding and just the civil laws at the time.
Just gives the nature of everything he did.
Yes.
There's embellishment.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a particular like embellishment or falsehood that you might highlight?
Oh, it's just when you talked about what he did in a battle, it's always just a little more grandiose. He didn't do massive embellishments,
Yeah.
but it's just things are a little more grandiose than what most likely happened.
He takes some artistic liberty.
Yes.
Okay.
As I said, if you want an interesting one, an autobiography to read, find the autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, the Italian artist. It's a true work of fiction. I do a class on the sack of Rome in 1527, and he writes extensively of his participation in that and the defense of Rome. At one point, the leader of the Spanish forces, the Duke of Burgundy, is shot and killed during the initial stages of the attack. Cellini did it. At one point, there's a cannon shot that breaks up an important charge on a bridge.
Cellini caught it.
Cellini fired it. Yeah, so that one, if you want a really interesting read, it's fun.
Elvis, Cellini.
Yeah.
JFK, Cellini.
Uh, So-
Bigfoot, Cellini.
So Gotz finally passed away on the 23rd of July in 1562 and is buried at the Chantal Monastery in Württemberg, Chantal-Württemberg. They have a web page which actually has some really neat stuff on him and his tomb there in the monastery. For sources again, this one is really good. The best source that I will get onto these. If you look in here, this timeline, if you really want to see what the guy did, it's in your handout. This is what he was involved in that is known. There are, how many feuds in here? At least 10. He loved to fight. He loved to do all this stuff. The sources, if you want this, the really good other source is, where is it? It's online. Yes, the Bradley Fancher from the Tennessee State University is a paper that you can find online, and it's a great source on his life. It's a lot of research, a lot of in-depth. You get to separate some of the fact from the fiction. It's a great source if you really want to see a different view of how he lived. Anybody have any questions or anything you want to? Yes.
Maybe you said right at the start
Yeah.
because I was a bit late, but what drew you personally to this whole story to learn so much about this person and even teach an entire class on it? Is there something particular? Is he a relative? Anything?
No, I found him just doing research on another thing. Actually, I did a class one time on the Peasants' War, and just reading his involvement in the research on that. And it just, yes, this guy had one hand, and he had this amazing mechanical hand, and he did all this stuff. He's like, this guy's neat. I want to learn about him. Yeah.
He lived to be 80-something.
Yeah.
At a time when,
Yeah, and also in a time when he made his living fighting.
well, and he had an autobiography.
Yes.
Which I don't know how common that was.
Not very.
at the time. It's rare now.
Yeah. So, yeah, he was a truly interesting person. So there are some really interesting reads in there, and some of his views of people, and some of his views of how things were done, like his talk about when they did the attack on Swiss Confederation, how he goes into detail about how he feels Maximilian failed, why he failed, what he did wrong. He has some very good analysis of Maximilian's entire command structure.
Like it's not like tactical analysis.
And a lot of
That was
just
his bread and butter.
yeah, a lot of it with his command structure, because he really thought that the command structure was the reason that the Maximilian's forces lost against the Swiss. Anything else? Yes.
No,
Oh,
I'm
sorry. I thought you did.
Thank you.
All right.
Did his mercenary group, were they mostly just hand weapons or
Oh, yeah.
gunpowder? Or
No,
did they
mostly-
slip around artillery?
No, there was mostly just whatever that you could carry, and you would say it was ambush tactics. You know, you'd wait for somebody to ride down a trail. If you knew this certain nobility was coming this way on a road, you would just wait and ambush for them and kidnap them. If you knew a caravan of important goods or a payroll wagon was coming through, you waited for it, and you sent your people and just ambushed it when they came out.
A lot of intelligence gathering,
Yes.
guerrilla tactics.
Yep, yeah. That was a lot of what he learned and how
gotta
he
do
did
with
fighting.
small groups.
Yep, because most of his groups, as I said, 100, 150 people. Yep. And he had to pay them, but you know, everybody got their share, but he got the most. There you go. Well, I thank you all for coming out, and I hope you had a good time. Yep.
Yes.
Yay. Thank you. I have fun doing this, and now I got to figure out what I'm going to do next year. All right. If anybody wants to take a look